Alright, so for this next video, we're going to take a look at using controls with our list of views. So I'm going to modify this to instead start using a particular kind of control from the JavaFX libraries instead of these strings that we've been using so far. So the control that I want to use for this is actually going to be images. So I've added a couple of images to my project already related to each one of the different types of crusts and toppings. So I've got a bacon, a pepperoni, a stuffed crust, a thin crust, and a traditional crust image that I'm going to be using with this application. So in order to use that, I need to make sure that I have the proper imports for it. So we're going to go ahead and bring in the image and ImageView classes. So we get both of those from their from the scene.image package. And then once I've got that, then I also want to go ahead and modify these list views to instead be for image views. And then the next thing I'll go ahead and do is start setting up the loading. So we'll have our images. We'll set that up for the control, the image view, and then we'll also go ahead and do a little bit of customization on these images to make sure that they'll fit within the application window properly. So we're going to go ahead and load these images. We have our image for our traditional crust, which we'll call trad crust, is equal to a new image. This will be for the traditional crust image, so I'll have that JPEG. For this, I'm just going to go ahead and take what I have right here and just copy this down a couple of times, since I'm going to need to reuse this same general structure 4 more times for the other 4 images. So we have our trad crust, we're going to have our thin crust, our stuffed crust, pepperoni, and our bacon. So these are going to be the 5 images. And then over here, I need to go ahead and modify these to correctly go get those 5 image files. So this is going to be the thin crust, the stuffed crust, the pepperoni, and the bacon. And one last thing to go ahead and do also is to make sure that we are specifying the file protocol. Just go ahead and put that in front of each of these images. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is then take those images and make image views for them. So we're going to have our image view. Basically, I'm just going to use the name of the image plus add the acronym IV at the end. So I'll have trad crust IV to indicate that this is an image view. We'll make a new image view object and give it the trad crust image that we just loaded. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy that and move that down a couple more times. And again, just kind of take the same approach, just modify the variable name for each one of these. And then over here, make sure that we're getting the correct image. And then the next thing I want to go ahead and do is also set up the making sure that the aspect ratio is being preserved, and then also set up the height for each one of these images, because I want to make sure that the height is constant, and then we'll just let the width be kind of automatically adjusted to maintain that aspect ratio. So I'll have 2 more lines for each of these to set up the aspect ratio and the height. So we're going to use set preserve ratio, set that to true. We then go ahead and again take that image view, and we're going to set the height to be 100. And then we'll go ahead and grab this and copy it down a few times. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances of this. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and select these both at the same time and just kind of quickly get this set up. So we're going to have our thin crust, we're going to have our stuffed crust image view, we're going to have our pepperoni image view, and we're going to have our bacon image view. Alright, So this allows us to load our 5 images, set them up in our 5 image views, set the aspect ratio and the height, and make sure that everything is kind of sized up and positioned correctly. All right, and then continuing on with this idea of position, there's one other thing that I want to go ahead and modify about my my list views. So the way that I want to position this is, previously we have been doing this with vertical list views. So we just have kind of a top-down displaying of the items in them. I want to go ahead and modify this so that now these are being displayed from left to right. So they're going to be in more of a horizontal positioning or a horizontal orientation. So there's another class that I want to bring in from the JavaFX library, which is going to be the orientation class. And similar to things like our padding and our alignment with the pause class and the insets class, this will also come from the geometry package. So we're going to do javafx.geometry.orientation. Go ahead and save that. And then right here, after I set up my list views, since this is a pretty straightforward portion that's going to affect the layout, you could also place it right around here where we specify the size and maybe set a couple of other things. For this part, I'm just going to go ahead and show both of these lines right here for setting up the orientation. So I'm going to do this for each of them. So we're going to grab our crusts list view. We're going to use the set orientation method. We'll then specify that orientation, and we can pick a particular constant from the orientation class, which is horizontal. All right, and we'll do the same thing for the toppings list view, the set orientation method, get the orientation class, and get that horizontal constant. Okay, so we'll save all of that like it is. We'll then also go ahead and modify the dimensions for our list views. So because I set the fed height to 100, I'm going to go ahead and set up the height of the list view to kind of reflect that. So I'm going to make it 110. So I'll give it a little extra spacing on the top and bottom for each of these. So both list views, I'm going to modify their preferred height to be 110 pixels. And then the other thing I need to go ahead and do is now replace these 3 strings so that instead they're going to be the 3 image views for the crusts, and then these 2 strings should be replaced with the 2 image views for the toppings. So for this one, we're going to do the traditional crust, image view, the thin crust, image view, and the stuffed crust, image view. And then down here, we'll do the pepperoni image view and the bacon image view. Okay. All right. And then one last thing is to also go ahead and modify the dimensions of this. So we're going to make the height a little bit taller to account for the fact that we've added these images to it. So we've had to make our list views a little bit taller. So I'm going to change this to be about 500 by 500 to give it a little bit more room in the application window. All right, so that should cover everything for this. So we'll go ahead and compile this and run it and see how this looks after we've modified the list views to be using image views instead of strings. So we'll go ahead and compile this. So bring the pizza cutter, or pizza maker. Then we'll run it. Okay, so we've got most of the interface. We see some of the images showing, a couple more that are not showing. So real quick before we try to run or try to use any of this, I'll go ahead and close this, come back over to the code and double check. Most likely if the images aren't showing, that would mean that the names there's a typo in them, and it looks like it is with the extension. So put an E into each of those 2. That should fix both of them. Yeah. Okay, so go ahead and save that. We'll recompile it and rerun it. Okay, so now we've got all of our images. So we see the 5 images that I'm using. We've got 3 for crusts, 2 for the 2 different kinds of toppings. So we've still got our traditional crust, and that's selected by default. You can kind of see it highlighted around it. So you have selected the traditional crust, and you have not selected any toppings. We change this to thin crust. We can see it change there. And then to this stuffed crust, it changes there. We can then select a topping, and it'll tell us that you have selected pepperoni. We can change it to bacon, see that you have selected bacon. I'll hold down the command key and then click the pepperoni topping and see that you've selected pepperoni and bacon. So we can go ahead and select both of those at the same time. And then while that's selected, we can also come up here and continue to change this. So we can go ahead and modify everything based on clicking these images rather than clicking strings in these list views. Okay, so this is going to wrap up everything for the ListView class. So we got to see a couple of different ways that we could re-implement that pizza maker interface. Taking a look at setting up ListViews with strings and then with images. We've also seen a little bit about the relationship between ListView and the array lists, arrays, and also the observable list classes. For the next couple of videos through this set, we'll start looking at some of the other advanced controls that are available. This is going to include things like combo boxes, sliders, text areas, menus, and also file choosers. So those will be the next couple of things that we look through.